morning on Nightwatch, public opinion on Thomas and Hill.
Americans think that each of them is mostly telling the truth, but also hiding something about their past relationship. But when forced to choose between the two of them, Clarence Thomas is seen as the more believable of the two.
Can Bush be beaten?
If the election were held today, forget about it. The only way they would beat Bush is the old Huey Long line, if he was found in bed with a live boy or a dead girl. And even then, he'd carry the state of Massachusetts.
The advantage of vaudeville.
Anybody had the chance to do whatever they wanted to. And vaudeville was the open door, open sesame to doing what you wanted to do on the stage.
Also, all sides of sexual harassment, making a buck off murder, and writing a black woman's life. Now in Washington, here is Nightwatch guest anchor, Juan Williams.
Good morning. Later today, the Senate will have the final say on perhaps the most watched confirmation hearings in history. Senators will vote on whether Judge Clarence Thomas should or should not sit on the Supreme Court. A little later, we'll look at how the American public feels about Thomas now that the vote approaches. We want to look first, though, at the aftermath of these hearings and the legacy they leave for women and men, blacks and whites. Three people are with us. Rosemary Dempsey is Vice President of the National Organization for Women. Kim Crenshaw teaches and writes about race, gender, and the law at the University of California at Los Angeles. She's in Washington as an informal advisor to Anita Hill, a personal friend. And from New York is Catherine McKinnon, Professor of Law at the University of Michigan. She's a leader in feminist legal theory. Welcome to all three of you.
Thank you, Juan.
Thank you, Juan.
I was wondering if any of you would like to start about, just generally, what is the aftermath of this case for feminism in the United States?
Well, one aftermath of it certainly is that issues of sexual abuse are now seen as public questions, as matters that people who hold high office have to be accountable to answering to.
I think I think we've got a very positive and a negative aftermath depending on the outcome. But what we have is, for all women across this country, and as I think has been made very aware, there are millions of us who have been sexually harassed in the workplace. This is a phenomenal event because the chord is struck. It is a public policy question. We're talking about an illegality. On the other hand, the way Anita Hill has been treated, the way that we still have ideas about people who are sexually harassed are not nice girls, just like people who are raped are not nice girls. That somehow the whole focus turns on the victim is again a replaying of the story. What will happen to me if I come forward?
I understand.
I think clearly it depends on the outcome. It really depends on whether or not Anita Hill is vilified or vindicated by tomorrow's vote. But I think regardless of what happens with the Clarence Thomas nomination, there's going to be an issue that the black community is going to have to deal with. And that's what's particularly of concern to me. We have a situation here where a black woman has come forward. She has said that she has experienced gross forms of sexual harassment. And we've seen the way that race could be used to manipulate the entire presentation of this issue. So a black woman ends up being accused of lynching a black man. Now, I think this is a clear example of the way that the Republican Party has been able to use race to shape public opinion.
Well, really, what we're trying to do here, though, is look kind of in the aftermath of this, because I think everybody has their opinion one way or the other.
The aftermath is very important because what we're seeing on all fronts is a black community that's being divided on different issues. We saw it divided before on the question of affirmative action. What we're seeing now is divided on gender questions. So I think this is a legacy of this particular incident that we're going to have to deal with in the future.
Ms. McKinnon, I wondered if you would offer us some idea of what you think the future holds in terms of people looking at questions of sexual harassment. Do you think the nation's consciousness has been raised by these events? Do you think that that whether or not the Senate votes to confirm or not to confirm in some way will affect that consciousness-raising exercise?
Well, this has been an extraordinary national teach-in on the subject of sexual harassment, and absolutely people are far more aware of it, and in particular the subject of sexual harassment through pornography, which has been the most covered-up form of sexual harassment, has been given some real public visibility. I think that also what's happened is that the credibility of Professor Hill has come under vicious attack while the Senate has not pursued documenting what would have supported that credibility, and that is whether or not Clarence Thomas is a pornography consumer or was a pornography consumer, which is something that could have been gone at separately as a factual matter, and something the American women are entitled to know about, given the impact of consumption of pornography on any man's attitudes toward women's equality and issues involving sexual abuse generally, which are very well documented.
So do you think that's the next step?
Well, I think it's certainly a step that should already have been taken, and is very much the next step. That is, the higher visibility of pornography as a form of abuse of women is one of the long-term consequences. But how the vote comes out has a great deal to do with the lessons that American women draw from this. I mean, what women could match Professor Hill's composure, her dignity, her grace, frankly, her credibility? A lot of American women look at this woman and they think, boy, look how she's been treated. I don't want to be treated like that, and I don't know that I couldn't come across any better than she did. And if it turns out that in the end this is subject to what is in essence just water off a duck's back, she's the water, they're the duck. I mean, if it just flows off and life goes on and the problem gets submerged again, that again submerges women again, and women's complaints again.
Let me just ask, I saw that the White House was advancing the argument that, look, it looks to me like both sides are holding strong in their presentations. The American people seem to say that both sides seem to have some truth to what they're saying. So the White House is arguing that the Senate should go back to its position of previously, which was, I think, the votes were by a slim margin to confirm Thomas. Now, you see that as somehow repudiating women?
Well, yes, absolutely. And I think that some very serious questions have been raised here. The Senate managed to expose at least the factual basis in part of some of it. For example, Professor Hill's allegations were corroborated by 4 extremely credible witnesses that nobody could shake. And beyond that, we've got the Senate in committee collaborating in what amounts to letting the person who is accused of this set the limits on the investigation into what he is accused of, which would never be allowed, certainly in a court of law, and is an extraordinary thing to have permitted. I mean, this man says, whatever I do in private is not subject to discussion. Well, if he did this in private, then he's trying to keep people away from it. If he didn't do it in private, then it seems to me his answer to the question would be no, and that does not violate his privacy.
And what would you expect to discover if you weren't to go into his private life?
Well, if somebody takes drugs, for example, it's not regarded as that's private. We can't look into that. I don't know where people, take cocaine or smoke grass if it isn't in private, but we regard that as relevant, and we don't know the policy consequences of taking grass the way we know the policy consequences of consuming pornography.
Okay. Hang with us. Nightwatch will be right back to continue this very important discussion. Welcome back. We're talking here about the future of the relationship between men and women and charges of sexual harassment in America in the aftermath of the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill case. And I was wondering how NOW views this issue.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I think that the aftermath will definitely affect the elected officials, in particular the Senate, from this. We have never, I've been in now for 20 years and been in the national office for some time. Our phones have never been jammed like they have been jammed over this issue. We have women who have called us, who are talking about sexual harassment that took place in their lives 30 years ago, that begin crying when they tell us this over the phone. I had watched the Senate hearings last night till almost the bitter end and was appalled to hear the senators start talking about and joking about how when they were in law school, people clipped out pictures from Playboy, put them on a tort exam, and this particular individual got the highest mark. The women of America are enraged. Now, if you're talking about polls still assume, because of the very way that Anita Hill has been savagely attacked and brutalized in her credibility, as all women, and particularly black women's credibility, is on the line and assumed to be not up there in this country because of the very effective means of keeping women down through the threat and the practice of sexual harassment and other kinds of sexual violence and other kinds of violence. However, women, you can't put women back in a bottle. You've now brought this out nationally. They have viewed their senators, supposedly the most august body of legislative body in this country, allowing a woman of this stature to be brutalized, and then, whether or not it was 2 o'clock in the morning, joking about their own sexual foibles, their demeaning of women,
and engaging in male bonding.
The women are furious. Now, we may not be able to defeat all of these senators if they do not defeat Clarence Thomas, but their lives will never be quite the same.
Well, do you think, Ms. Crenshaw, that'll have an effect on the presidential race? Do you think that people are going to look at George Bush in a new light because of this?
Well, I really wonder about it. I'm not quite sure what effect it'll have in the long run. I think it's a possibility. We've seen in Virginia, for example, that the women's vote can really make a difference in a lineup that people thought was pretty much set. So I think it's possible that women would finally see in the public setting clearly what goes on in courtrooms across the country.
Do you think this then rises to the level that political analysts like myself have been talking about the abortion issue in terms of politics? Now, does this episode bring sexual harassment to that same level?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think one thing it clearly showed was that there is a gender difference in the understanding of what sexual harassment is. For the most part, the senators were asking, is this something that someone would say if they want to date someone? Well, that's assuming that harassment is about the desire to date. Perhaps it's initially started by a rejected approach. For example, in any number of situations that most women in America have had, walking down the street, someone approaches them, they turn their head or they keep walking, then the person becomes abusive. They want to take something away. And usually that something is dignity. Yeah. So the more dignity a person has, the more impenetrable they are, the more they present themselves as a target for this kind of harassment. So it's abuse. It's not the desire to seek some kind of relationship.
Ms.
I think
McKinnon,
women are seeing that.
Ms. McKinnon, let me just ask, we've been talking here about the kind of very negative attitude that are displayed by men generally, yes. But one thing that has come up in a number of the polls is that people feel that Thomas has been really pressured by this situation as well. How do you account for, the idea of men and whether or not their rights are being protected in all of this?
Well, it's important to protect the rights of men, certainly. But what I think has happened is that the sympathy going in is with the man because of the Freudian and pornographic belief that women, particularly black women, who make accusations of sexual misconduct are lying because of the notion that they fantasize it, that they really want it, deep in their hearts. This is exactly what they really want. And so the sympathy is with the man. Then when the man comes on and is so very much a man, is so angry, is so outraged, which at least to me seems consistent with being angry at being held accountable to this kind of behavior in a public forum. In other words, this is the kind of thing you're supposed to be able to keep private and get away with. This is the kind of thing, frankly, no man in history has ever been held accountable for in the way this man has. And it seems to me that anger and that outrage, whatever its basis, came across. And the man, frankly, bullied people. And I think that people respond with very much reflex reactions to that kind of display of masculine aggression. So they're cowed, they're intimidated.
So in the future, he may be the first, but he won't be the last. Men in the future will be held to this standard in public discussion, in political campaigns, etc.
I certainly hope they should be. It would seem to me how they treat women is one of the most relevant indicators of their attitudes toward women. And their attitudes toward women determine our lives across the board on a whole range of issues that they have determinative say over. And it would seem to me that rape should be an issue in a presidential election in a real way, that pornography and how abuse through pornography happens, what happens to the women in pornography, what happens to women through pornography in their lives, as children, as adults, at work, across the board. Men should be asked about this in public and their positions on it.
And so it sounds to me, though, that like your position would be that we need in this society, the United States, to be either ban pornography or put closer limits on it?
I think pornography needs to be seen as the civil rights issue that it is. That is, that women are abused through pornography. They're abused to make it. They're abused through its use by consumers. There are millions of examples of it. It's extremely well known, and yet present legal remedies are totally inadequate.
So what would you advise, that we ban it?
Well, no, I would advise that a civil rights law be passed that understands that when women are hurt through pornography, that they could sue for sex discrimination. It would just be an extension of the theory of sexual harassment into the area of pornography generally.
I understand. Okay, stay with us. Nightwatch will be right back to finish this up. Welcome back to Nightwatch. We're discussing the aftermath of this traumatic and I think difficult situation that we've seen between Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I wondered if people think that now there's going to be an outbreak of more sexual harassment claims in the workplace.
Well, one would certainly hope that women would have this, would gain strength from this and gain courage from this to come forward. I think that is quite probably one effect. I think another effect is, as Kim was saying, and I think that one of the things that we have to do as responsible individuals and responsible organizations that represent constituencies is to stop the Republicans and the Democrats using the politics of race and the politics of gender, which are really 19th century questions. We've got to settle these questions. We've got to get them out of politics and deal with real issues. This is an issue of a crime may have or have not been committed. This is a question of power, abuse of power. This is a question of the person who was the highest-ranking officer in charge of enforcing the sexual harassment violations, of being accused of sexual harassment. This is not a question of whether or not women are, and particularly black women, are credible, whether or not, from the time of slavery and from the time of Sigmund Freud, when a woman, whether she was 8 or 40, brought forward a question of sexual abuse, rape, or harassment, from the time of Freud on, he sort of legitimized it. She must be fantasizing. He couldn't deal with the fact that so many young women, children, were talking about sexual abuse and harassment. Let's deal with it. Let's deal with it. This is a reality, so women can come forward, so we can socialize our young men and our young women, our young children differently, and get rid of these problems, so that these kinds of violations of the law are out in the open, and we're nowhere near that today.
Ms. Creswell, how do you socialize children differently to deal with relations between the sexes?
Well, one, I think a lot has to do with how children are educated and socialized with respect to what their relationships are going to be with people of the same sex, and importantly with people of the same race. As I was mentioning before, I think that we risk a serious error if we think about this solely in gender terms. This is not solely a gender issue. Whenever you're dealing with black women, you're dealing with issues that lie at the intersection of race and gender, and I'm really concerned that come out. In this case, you've seen racial stereotypes being thrown out there, the stereotypes of black men being sexually aggressive, but you haven't really seen much attention being paid to the gender stereotypes, women not being credible, women being psychotic. That's basically the only way that you can explain how so many women put forward these claims, and people don't want to believe them. But importantly, there's the issue of racism and sexism as they play out on the credibility of black women. We know in other cases, for example, that black women as victims of other kinds of sexual aggression, such as rape, such as battering, are not usually seen as credible witnesses. If a person has raped a black woman, statistics suggest that the average term that they get is 2 years, where if you put a white woman in her stead, the average term is 10 years. So clearly there's a gender issue going on here, but there's a race issue that also intersects and creates a particular problem for black women. And that's something that I think black women are beginning to see in this particular situation.
You know, Ms. Dempsey, there's been a divide, though, in the feminist movement for a long time between black and white women. You don't see that many black women in NOW, for example. Do you think now this will bring more women of color into organizations like NOW?
Oh, there are many African American feminist organizations. I mean, I think that as with all strategies to divide, certainly the powers that are have attempted to divide the women in this country, and there are issues. There are certainly issues of we've been brought up in segregated and racist societies, and of course we have our issues and our problems. But to say that African American women are not involved and have not always been involved in the feminist movement in this country is just not true.
No, I didn't say that. I said they weren't now.
But now
but
is
now
not
part
necessarily
of
the black women's
Yes,
movement.
so-
not the whole feminist movement.
Right, but now, I guess, is the leading player in terms of feminist organizations. Is that right?
Well, now is a
The largest?
it's large and it's multi-issue.
Right.
And we represent many issues. We're not a one-issue organization, and we have a diverse membership. It is not as diverse as we like. However, what's more important is where we want to be and where we need to be, and I think where we are more and more is there on the issues with our African American sisters, with our Latina sisters. I mean, that's the question is, are women working together in this movement? And I believe, yes, this kind of an issue and this kind of an incident absolutely brings us together.
So do you think it brings people in?
It's important, yes, to point out that black women have traditionally organized in their own organizations. There's the Black Women's Health Project, there's the National Association of Negro Women. There are plenty of black women's organizations. I think to expect for now to be representative of all women's groups is quite frankly an assumption that accepts that white women's experiences are necessarily going to speak to everyone. Black women have some particular issues that they deal with in their own organizations, and they are affiliated with NOW. Many black women are in NOW, but it's important to realize that they have organized and they are continuing to organize.
Now, what are the kinds of issues that you say separate out these groups?
Well, I think as you saw in this entire situation, black women are concerned about the marketing of these stereotypes. They are concerned, and they need to be, about the use of race politics to bring black people down. So in any situation, they're going to have to determine how to go about putting forward their interests in a way that doesn't reinforce racism, but also in a way that doesn't reinforce sexism. And that's a real difficult situation to be in. That's the situation that Anita Hill was in. That was the situation that many other black women are in when they have these particular issues having to do with sexual aggression, with other kinds of economic and social issues, where their particular identity as black women and basically black working class women gives them a different kind of political agenda that they need to pursue.
Thank you, Ms. Crenshaw, and thank you very much, Ms. Dempsey, for coming here.
Thank you, Juan.
Thank you very much. Nightwatch will be right back. Stay with us.
Still to come on Nightwatch, public opinion of the Thomas hearings, murderers and their stories, from brown girl to daughters, comedy with a political attitude, and spicy Ginger Rogers. Now in Washington, here is Nightwatch guest anchor Juan Williams.
Welcome back. Judge Clarence Thomas may or may not be confirmed to the Supreme Court in a Senate vote set for tonight, but he appears to have won the battle of the witnesses before the Senate Judiciary Committee. A CBS News New York Times poll taken Sunday shows that by a margin of more than 2-1, Americans believe Thomas over Anita Hill. Kathy Frankovic, Director of Surveys for CBS News, joins us from New York with the details. Welcome, Kathy.
Thanks, Juan.
Tell me, do people believe Thomas or Hill regarding these allegations?
I think the best way of describing the American viewpoint of this is that they think that both Thomas and Hill are hiding something, that each is mostly telling the truth. We asked separate questions about each of them, and we found that only 30% thought that Thomas was telling the entire truth, but only 14% thought that Hill was telling the entire truth. The bulk of the answers are in this gray area, where Americans think that each of them is mostly telling the truth, but also hiding something about their past relationship. But when forced to choose between the two of them, Clarence Thomas is seen as the more believable of the two.
You know, there was one thing I saw in your statistics that really stunned me, and the question was that if there are doubts about the truth of the charges, what should the Senate do?
If there are doubts about the truth of the charges, Thomas gets the benefit of the doubt. By a majority of the American people say that if there are still doubts remaining after this is all over, he should still be confirmed. And just about a third say that under those circumstances he should not be confirmed. That's very different, I should point out, than the responses that people give if you ask them what the Senate should do if the charges are true. If the charges are true, the overwhelming response of the American people is that Clarence Thomas should not be confirmed as a Supreme Court justice.
What about the attitudes of women who've experienced sexual harassment, Kathleen? I just can't imagine that they aren't more sensitive to what's been going on here.
Well, they are more sympathetic to Anita Hill. They are somewhat more skeptical of Clarence Thomas, but a plurality of those women, and it's 4 out of 10, who say that they've experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, a plurality of those women still have a favorable opinion of Thomas, still say he should be confirmed, and still believe him more than they believe Anita Hill.
Just break that down a second for the viewers. When you say a plurality, you mean?
I mean less than 50%, but more than think the opposite. So that when I say a plurality of those people, those women who report sexual harassment have a favorable opinion of Thomas, I mean that fewer than 50% of them do, but more have a favorable opinion than have an unfavorable one. Is that?
Yeah, that's it. Now, it appears that the public is clearly giving Thomas, then, the benefit of the doubt. He's innocent until proven guilty. Is that what your poll's finding, you think?
I think that's a very good way of characterizing it. This is a man who went into these hearings favored by the public by about 2-1 for confirmation. He is coming out of the hearings, and I should note that this is a process. We're continuing to interview. He is coming out of the hearings with that same distribution of support for him. So that the public went into the hearings predisposed in his favor, and they seem to be coming out that way, at least as of Sunday night.
And I asked before about women who might have been victims of sexual harassment, but just generally, in terms of gender, does it break down one way or the other?
Very little. On many of these questions, there are small differences between men and women, but those differences are on the order of 4, 5, 6 percentage points. They're not diametrically opposite, as we've seen on some other questions.
Yeah, the gender gap that we've talked about in terms of politics before, that doesn't exist here.
Not to the margins that we're used to seeing, no.
Now, there was some headlines this last Monday morning about polygraph tests. The Senate Judiciary Committee said, well, we didn't ask for that, but it's the kind of thing that might play in the public mind. What do you think?
Well, we asked people who we interviewed after the reports of Anita Hill's polygraph tests were made public, whether they thought Clarence Thomas should also take a polygraph test. And there was a fairly even split. 50% of those people we interviewed said that, yes, he should take a polygraph test as well. 44% said that he should not have to take a polygraph test. So at least the first reaction from the American people was mixed.
Mixed. Now, what about black and white? Do you get a very different view here?
Overall, on questions about Thomas and Thomas versus Hill, no, we don't get a very different view. We do get some differences on questions that specifically have to do with race. In particular, a question as to whether or not Clarence Thomas was treated differently by the Senate Judiciary Committee because he is black. Most Americans say no, he was not treated any differently, although 16% overall say that, well, he was dealt with harder because he was a black man. A white nominee would have been dealt with differently in similar circumstances. However, more than a third of the blacks we spoke to on Sunday night said that Thomas was treated harder by the committee because of race.
So a third say that he was treated more harshly, but two-thirds say he was not treated.
Well, 37% say he was treated harder, and the rest say he was treated the same, or they couldn't judge whether there was an impact of race on
And in
that.
terms of their support for Hill or Thomas, how do they come out?
They come out in Thomas's favor by about the same margin as people overall, as whites do.
So, okay, so now...
What I think the point is that Anita Hill, because she is black, doesn't seem to be picking up additional support from black Americans, any greater support from black Americans than she's picking up from
What
white
about
Americans.
from black women?
I didn't look at that, and I'm afraid our sample sizes would start dropping.
Okay. You know what struck me just being in Washington this weekend was this story captivated this city like nothing I've seen in my time here in Washington. In fact, if you looked at television this weekend, it looked to me like the country was having a communal experience like the Kennedy assassination or something. What did people find so captivating?
Well, I think it was the drama of it. We found that well over 8 out of 10 people told us that they had watched at least part of the hearings live. Just under half said that they'd been watching during the day on Sunday, and on Sunday the hearings were not carried for any substantial length of time by any of the 3 broadcast networks, so people were going out of their way to pay attention. It was the drama. It was as you know, we're interested in sex. It was probably the sexual nature of some of the discussions, and there were dramatic moments, many dramatic moments. But I think people were also, this is a cynical American public, were also captivated by the spectacle of the United States Senate. There is a great amount of expression in the public in this poll of really the sadness of all of this. The testimony overall contained things that weren't appropriate for public hearing, and almost 60% of the American people told us that they thought nothing good could come out of these hearings.
One last quickie, Kathleen. What do you think the impact of this poll data will be on the final vote of the United States Senate?
Well, I think senators have to pay attention to it. I think they will. They are looking for it. I'm sure it will make decision-making easier if for a senator who would like to vote for Clarence Thomas to look at this poll and other polls like this. I should also caution, though, that the process is going to go on, and there are going to be even more polls released before the vote takes place on Tuesday.
Thank you very much. That's Kathleen Frankovic, the Director of Polling for CBS News. Stay with us. Nightwatch will be right back.